Okay, so easy place to start. How did you end up working in the IT industry?
I actually started in IT. It was my first job in HR a long time ago. I was working for a company who was selling their software services as business process. And that was all in the preparation of the Y2K initiatives. And so I was only there for about a year, but I was taking care of a lot of administration around their immigration processes within the HR team. So I already worked for them way back when. Um, and in the meantime, since then, I've worked for a variety of other industries, automotive financial. Then I moved to oil and gas. And then I moved into the entertainment space, so the post-production sector of the entertainment field. And then I got a call about a year ago from the company I'm working for now, IDnow. They were looking for someone to dive in and build up their HR organization from scratch. So that was a great challenge that I just couldn't pass up. And given that it was back in the IT industry, very interesting because of the momentum and the challenges that industry offers in terms of its pace that it runs. But it's a much smaller company than I've ever worked in before. But that was also part of the challenge, trying to really look for solutions that would fit this company long term.
Okay, and in terms of the sort of challenges, you've been in the IT industry, then it sounds like you've gone elsewhere and then come back. I mean, just challenges then, I suppose, throughout your career, would you classify the ones you've experienced as being just normal things that people encounter in their career, or would you have said that you're at any stage your gender has made, seems to have been a problem to you when it comes to any part of your work, or is that you not sort of come across that?
Well, it's a little difficult because the fact that my profession in HR is typically a lot of females, right? So the majority of my colleagues and the majority of the people I'm working with tend to be female, but so I don't particularly feel like there's a bias one way or another in terms of opportunities or chances. Just it happens to be that that's the function that I'm in is sort of already predominantly female. But certainly this is the first position I've ever been in where I'm sitting in a management team that's all male at my level, at the executive level. The company I'm working for has a great gender ratio across the whole organization, but in the senior executive level, it's a minority for me. So I try not to focus on it. I try not to make it a thing. That's sort of my way of looking at it. And we can maybe talk about that a little bit more throughout the interview, but I certainly don't feel like I've ever experienced, luckily, something that was that obvious that occurred due to my gender.
Okay, and funny enough, one or two people I've talked to have mentioned about the HR aspect of IT, just as we've been talking about other things. If I may ask, do you think, being, as you say, probably the majority of HR folks are females, but do you think that helps with this whole sort of diversity issue, that you are more aware, if you like, when it comes to putting together job descriptions, etc., that you maybe aren't as closed, if you like, that if it's a male looking for an IT coder, for example, he'll immediately think that he's looking for a male who wants to do IT coding, whereas you might have a slightly broader outlook, if you like, on suitable candidates. Is that correct?
No, I think any mature talent acquisition team is going to be doing things in a little bit more of a strategic way. So what we're doing is looking at the team dynamic for every and any role. So of course you have to identify what competencies are needed for the position and the sort of level of competency that you need in a candidate, experience and education and those kinds of things. But then you also have to look at what they would bring to the team, and to kind of round out the team. We're asking our hiring managers to also identify what they need if they're lacking in the team dynamic. That may be gender, that may be perspective, that might be introvert, they're all extroverts, or there might be someone who's really going to bridge their communications with another department, or it might be a variety of things. and certainly some of those characteristics are better found in different genders than others, but typically we're looking at, the rounding out the team dynamic, and that'll help us bring the right kind of candidates to the view of the hiring manager. And, we're very much looking at making sure that those, criteria are filled, not focusing on the gender piece itself, which is really interesting because actually this company has now 60-40 split. So that's quite high for an IT industry, given that we're not checking boxes or trying to fill quotas.
Yeah, and just without trying to labour the point, but do you find as well as part of the HR process, because I presume that you involve, people that aren't in HR when it comes to the interview, if it's a technical job, you've got technical people. Do you find yourself having to advise and help some of those people that are maybe not as experienced and aware of issues, and so either you can't ask that, or we perhaps need a rephrase?
Absolutely.
That
yes.
sort of thing you do come across.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big part of my team's job, is to make sure that we can kind of educate and coach hiring managers, no matter their gender, to get away from what they might have as an unconscious bias. And so we do training on that. And, my teams even had to go through training on their own to also make sure that they apply that, that they're able to coach managers through those kinds of decisions. And it is about really identifying where you might have a sort of stigmatism to something, whether it's where somebody went to school or it's the age that they must have graduated and therefore are a certain age now. It's just all these things that people tend to kind of put things together that might give them an assumption that's not even true. And it's trying to help them recognize what those are and the dangers that can then come from using those assumptions throughout your interview process. So it's really just kind of a healthy look in the mirror and recognizing yourself. I tend to assume this when I hear or see that. And that's a really helpful process for our hiring managers. We've gone through that this year, kind of across the board, training every manager, and it's something that's done. In most companies, that's quite common to find that, and it should be every year, the reminders of how biases change and they develop over time also. So it's something that's very important to keep supporting our managers through recognizing what they are and trying to find ways to get around those and not use those as part of their hiring decisions.
Okay, and in terms of the sort of time you've been working as you said earlier, you started in the IT and it went up, but just generally, so throughout your career, have you found that sort of understanding of diversity has improved just generally? You have less need to intervene or point out to people, maybe do it this way or that, or is it much the same as when you started out? What's
yeah, no, it certainly is more common, to talk about these topics now than it's ever been before. Haven't really met anybody who feels like that's the first they've heard of it or aren't realizing that that's a thing, because there has been quite a lot in, just in our news and different events that have taken place over the last 5-10 years. But I think any professional HR team will probably already be working on those things, and looking through, if I just think about some of the other things that have changed around validating for audits, you have to report as a company, your workforce, and you have to report the gender discrepancies that you might have in your salaries. You have to report on those things to external bodies that help keep you in check. Because of those, it has really caused companies to make sure, because you then see the numbers yourself as soon as you then have to produce those outward. Second thing that has really had an impact on that is, and bringing awareness is, all of the work that companies are doing on social responsibility. And you have, when company is bidding for business, they're typically having to answer a lot of those questions to prospective clients as well. So you're having to kind of reveal publicly now where you stand with your gender statistics, where you stand with some of the things that you make important to your organization or not. And if you're not able to document that you have those things on your agenda, then you may not get that business, or you may actually, in some cases, be fined. So some of those regulations have certainly brought it to the attention of management. So I don't think that in this day and age it's kind of unheard of or not known. Are people really doing it on a day-to-day basis? That's another thing. But I think the awareness is there, and that's certainly very different than it was even 5 years ago, in my opinion.
And in terms of the, as you say, if progress has been made, I think most people probably agree that it's slowish progress. But are there any things you can think of or you'd like to see to help move the process? But you say IT. I mean, you said your company has a 60/40. I think, as you say, that's quite a high. I think typically it's sort of mid-20s, if that. So
correct, yeah.
But clearly nobody particularly wants to have a quota system, because that doesn't necessarily get you the right candidate, etc. So just thoughts as to what you'd like to see, maybe, or things that could be done to help improve that balance.
I think awareness training, as I mentioned already before, but I think another thing that's kind of interesting that has happened, and maybe people who are out there looking for jobs who are on the market haven't realized this yet, but just over the last 2 years, with this complete upside down situation that we had with the Great Resignation and so on, there's a lot of research that's come out saying that over the last 2 years, people who have left their jobs haven't returned to the same industry. In fact, it's kind of a soaring number. It's more than 60% of people who left their jobs have gone to a different industry, which means people are making changes and people are getting hired despite making those changes. So if you're out there looking for work, if you're looking to change, if you're looking to do something differently, then it's not anymore going to be a black mark on your CV or on your application that you've changed industries and that you're not an industry expert. And that's true for IT. That's true for IT, for women in IT, because people are changing industry, and it's no longer like a stigmatism, or it's not a negative thing. So don't feel intimidated or held back from doing it, because that's accepted in today's world now.
And on a sort of, well, related slightly different note maybe, but in terms of the sort of age profile as well, do you think that the younger folks that seem to generally, certainly my children, should say, but they have a more relaxed attitude to a lot of things, and they're more accepting of the way the world is with all its variations? Do you think as those people come more and more into the workplace, we will naturally get at better outcomes because they don't have any of the if you, as everyone says, if you watch a program from the 70s on the telly, you go, oh my goodness, how could anyone possibly have that attitude?
How could we have done that? Yeah.
Whereas today's children just call it out for what it is straight away. So do you think that's going to help the situation?
I think so too. I think we're learning so much from the newcomers into the workforce that we need to build flexibility and independence in a space for everyone's voice to count, and that is regardless of any demographic, and that's really important. I think that will continue to come, and employers will need to continue to make space for that, and if you don't, you won't compete in that sector.
And in terms of just comparing your experience, sort of IT industry and others, has it been broadly similar? Have you noticed any massive differences in your job role to those industries, or was it pretty much everyone has the same attitudes and they've all sort of moved at the same pace to try and change?
No, it's very unique. I experienced it in other companies when supporting the sector of the company. So, even though being in for example, my the previous position in post-production, very large IT group doing development and so on softwares that basically led the products that we sold. And for that division, we had to manage that differently. We had to manage those resources differently, not individual, but in terms of the strategy to backfill the resource, or to have resources prepared and ready, or to have networks in different geographies already going to be able to attract people for future. And that's kind of how I've had to apply the approach for sourcing in this company in its totality, because you have people who are highly sought after with very unique skills for which your product and therefore your profitability really highly depend upon. So you have to put more out there. You have to have stronger networks. You have to, we had to hire talent acquisition managers who are in the IT sector, who have those networks, who can really talk to people in great depth about what they do and how they do it, and be well-versed in technology themselves. So you have to hire different people to be able to support in your HR organization. And then while you're managing them, you have to make sure you build in the right way to manage their performance, to give flexibility, to give individuality, to give space, like remote, and yet getting them into the office. So there, almost every aspect of what the manager has to support in order to achieve their results is a little different for those who are working in engineering and technology roles, different than what you might have, for example, in managing finance teams, or what you might have in other types of teams. So we've had to be very agile. We've had to be very quick to change maybe our benefits. What are they looking for? Oh, maybe something's changed. What are our competitors doing? Constantly watching what's happening outside. You just can't be complacent. You just can't put in a one size fits all and stop. You have to continue. You have to keep revisiting it and keep refreshing it. And that's what I found has been the most challenging but rewarding about managing this HR team in the tech space.
And in terms of that, I mean, the sort of job vacancies in the IT space, I know every sector, as you say, the Great Resignation, there seems to be a dearth of people out there, but the IT sector in particular seems to have a massive skills shortage. Do you think, to that extent, that's good for the diversity, in the sense that if people were tempted at one stage or other to be slightly prescriptive as to who they're looking for, now, I mean, the phrase beggars can't be choosers is perhaps a little bit harsh, but behind that, the idea that, we need to hire some people, and therefore we need to, open our eyes a bit more, rather than just looking down a particular channel where we think we'll get people. We need to be much more open to where we might find those people.
Could be, but I think it's still, a matter of what's available on the market. And there's a shortage of skills. I think those that are qualified and have had the education and the experience to the level of what you might need, you might have to make compromises. It's just a supply and demand issue, in my opinion. And if you had a pool of people to look at, as I said, we're now working on many different ways to look at that pool without those biases stopping us from looking at one CV versus another. So I think we're happy if we have a pool because the supply is going down. But certainly, I don't think that means now that opens a window for minorities to be chosen when otherwise they wouldn't have been, because I think there's enough awareness there. Or at least I'm really hoping there is enough awareness there in the majority of middle managers. Maybe, it's also a gender thing. So those at a middle management level, I think, have been exposed to it themselves already. And we have had enough time to advance and mature there. The supply and demand issue certainly is going to take a long time to level off, in my opinion. And you have to make compromises. Maybe it's on the number of years of experience, or the level of education that you're looking for from someone. But that's certainly something that then just promotes development within, which would allow you to bring in someone at a more junior level and develop them over time, which means you need to have a really strong L&D department to make sure that you have the right way of documenting the competencies that someone comes in with, and then helping them throughout their career to have job growth within the position to continue to develop. And then you'll have more of a kind of a two-way dialogue, should I say, with the person, and hopefully that's a retention mechanism. So hiring for more of a junior profile is not necessarily a bad thing, but could actually work towards your long-term resourcing strategies.
Yeah, maybe just as we finish, are you an optimist or a pessimist when it comes to the sort of the equality agenda? Achieving what's required. I think, as you alluded to, I think most people are aware of the problem, and hopefully are understanding of what needs to be done. But I think we can probably all agree that progress is slightly slower than is ideal. So do you think it will get there, or just unfortunately, because we've got hundreds of years, if you like, of history of male domination, being the main folks, that it's going to take quite a while just to unwind that sort of legacy?
Well, I'm very optimistic, because I think it's also on our radar screen to look beyond just the gender minorities, but minorities as a whole. And that has that has evolved quite quickly, I think. I mean, this company I'm working for is only about, now we're around 400 employees. We have 55 different nationalities in our company. And that's like 5 times the amount of locations we have. So we're not just diverse because we're in different locations. We're diverse because we have, people who move and live all over the world. And that wasn't the case 10 years ago. It wasn't so easy to just move and live somewhere else. So I think you have diversities also from a cultural perspective, that brings, a variety of diversity to teams and perspectives and ideas in the way we work. And that progress, I think, is quite good. I tend not to focus, as I said earlier in the interview, on the gender piece, because if you do, then at some point you become gender biased on the flip side, right? Then you're really only selecting for what you might think you're supposed to, right? But that's where I caution really making gender an aspect in any regard, because then it's like the counter bias can work against you. So, I mean, in my advice and working in any situation when you're a minority, I mean, the way I look at it is just not making it a thing, because the moment that you do, then you discredit your company, your competencies and qualities as well. And it can make you lose your focus. It can make you really, less effective if you're constantly feeling like, oh no, I'm the minority in the room. But if you're confident that doesn't matter, then it won't matter. It won't come back at you, because you're focusing on the competencies and skills that you've been hired for.
Okay, that's fascinating. Some great thoughts. So, Jamie, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. You too, Phil. Thanks.